Welcome to the Service MVP podcast. My name is Joe Crisara, America's service coach, and today we are talking with a person that I met recently through a different channel, but definitely very relevant to what we teach, which is Dr. Jonathan Marion, who has a firm called Steps Along the Way. Jonathan, welcome to our show here, our podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Joe. Happy to be here.
Well, today's subject is going to be called Live, Connect, and Communicate Authentically. I truly believe authentic communication, to communicate what's in our heart, gives us freedom to live a life that's a lot simpler and much less complicated and more effective, right? Jonathan, why don't you tell us about how you kind of got started in this field? And when I saw it, I knew I had to have you on my podcast. So the second I met you, so definitely welcome here again. What's your background a little bit, and tell us a thumbnail about how you got started down this road.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So, I actually had been a professor of cultural anthropology for 20 years. And in early 2019, I was on a research trip down to Brazil, and I was staying with a friend of mine in a non-tourist area in Rio de Janeiro. And I remember sitting in his living room and looking across the street and having this realization that I was in a bedroom that was smaller than my closet back at my house. And yet I felt more at home staying
Mm.
in this small, humble apartment. And it was like, what was that about? And I realized it had to do with the quality of relationships, and that my friends and the people who knew me in Brazil knew Jonathan and loved me, the person. And yeah, they were aware of what I did professionally, and they might have been proud of me or proud for me, but they didn't care. And as long as I was in academia, it was all about the external accomplishments, whether it's, the latest publication, the latest grant, the latest teaching evaluation, and things like that. And that wasn't about what was, intrinsic to who I was. That wasn't about authentic me. That was about performative measures of success. And that I really wanted to pivot away from that. And that's what started me down a path that led me into what I now do as a transformational life coach, consultant, and speaker.
Well, thank you for joining us and imparting some of that wisdom that include both your your proud academic achievements, but also your real life achievements. Those are probably even more valuable than the training you got in your classroom and things like that. And it probably helped to fortify and supplement that for sure. So let's talk about this. Connect, and communicate authentically. Where would you like to start on this? I mean, definitely, we here believe that when you're communicating authentically and, to lead like one life where you're able to remember, what you say. I always say remembering the truth is easy, remembering your lies is harder, so sometimes, the flip side of authenticity is sort of like duplicity or some other kind of a thing where we're living a two or three different lives in a way, and only sharing, trying to remember which one we need to share with which person, and that can be exhausting. Why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about where you think we should start with the subject? What do you think?
Yeah, so the one thing that comes to mind is duplicity is when we're trying to, like, hide or shade or mislead someone as far as it. But I think there's also multiplicity, right? That we live in so many different overlapping arenas that we can feel really torn and we can feel really overwhelmed. And the more alignment that there can be with what's right for me and how do I want to show up in the world, the better we are. And what really sort of started my thinking along these lines was a friend who pointed out that we're human beings, not human doings.
Mm.
And as long as we're always focused on what we're doing and the accomplishment, we're not going to live the most meaningful or fulfilling lives that we can. And so that's part of what shifted my thinking and my focus from the what to the how.
Hmm. That's interesting. The human beings focus on being and that self-awareness and that element of it, rather than, because we're so, sometimes we do get busy in our day-to-day stuff and we lose track of the element of self-awareness. Because I think that is an important element of authenticity, right? To be able to see or view yourself in the light of truth in a way and take a hard look at yourself. Tell me how important that is, John.
Yeah, I think it's super important. And again, that idea of being really landed with me, especially then in later 2019. I had a spinal injury and nerve damage, and I couldn't even roll on a side on my own for 5 weeks.
Mm,
And it really was that existential challenge of, am I the same Jonathan? Do I have the same value in the world if I can't do all the things? And so that idea of being became an acronym that guided how I think about things and that I bring to my coaching and my consulting. And
mm,
so the B is begin where you are, which is exactly what you were just bringing up. It's who am I? What is really the situation? And if you think about, navigating, whether it's the GPS in your car or on your phone, if it doesn't have a signal to know where you are, the most detailed map in the world is useless. And the old-fashioned paper map, that pin, where are you? You are here when you go into the mall. And so we all have backgrounds. We all have, the steps in our lives that have got us to where we are now. And so that's part of the name of my business, as you'd said, Steps Along the Way, because it's both what got us to where we are and then what are the steps we want to take. So it
mhm,
begins with begin where you are. What are my strengths? What are my resources? What are my skill sets? What are the challenges? What are the circumstances and the limits? But we need to actually address what is before we can truly move forward.
mhm. That's some really good insights there, John. Are there any tips that, I mean, tell me about any stories you could tell me about, without naming any names, obviously, you don't have to do that, but how impactful has this information been that you bring to other people? Can you give us any, tell us a few stories about some things that you went through, some clients or people you know that sought your help, and then they wound up, seeing things in a different light and changing their paradigm because of what you're talking about here. Because I think it is very important and very impactful.
Sure. One comes to mind, and with your permission, I want to finish walking you through what that being strategy is really
Oh
quickly
yeah,
so you
absolutely. Yeah,
understand.
please, please. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to
Yeah.
shortcut you there, but
No,
go
no,
ahead.
no,
Yeah.
not at
Yeah.
all. So begin where you are, right? Was B. E
Hmm.
is explore where you want to go because it's too easy to say, I want things to change, but what is that change you want?
Hmm.
You know, does someone really want the raise and the promotion at work? Okay, if they do and it's authentic, that's great. But if it's just because it's what they feel they're supposed to be chasing and that everyone wants that, well, but what is it getting you? Is the responsibility or the time commitment so much that you actually then don't get to spend the time with things that matter more to you? And
Yeah.
so explore where you really want to go is E. I is an important step, and it's identify your options because just because you know where you are and where you want to go, there's so many different ways between them. And part of what I would say there is not only identify what are all the options, identify how you've made your best choices in the past. Like when you think back on major pivot points in your own life, what are the ones where you look back at it and go, yeah, that was really good? Or what are the ones you like, I wish I'd done that differently? So
Hmm.
identify, is it pros and cons lists? Is it gut feeling? Is it talking to, an inner circle? Which have given you your best options? And now apply that to all the options you can pick between for identifying your options between where you are and where you want to go.
Yeah. Yeah.
N is now start because all too
Hmm.
often we get trapped with trying to account for everything and we
Hmm.
can't. Life happens. And if you're driving home from work and there's a detour, you're not lost. There's a detour and you follow it. Or if it's voluntary, you're driving home from work and you think of, oh, wait, there's some groceries to pick up. And in the long run, yes, I'm tired now, but it'll save me time to do it on the way versus making a separate trip later. You're
Hmm.
not lost. It's a pivot. So starting is so important.
Hmm.
And that brings us to the G in being get your best. And
Hmm.
that's not an ending point. That's not a I'm done. It's a wait a minute. We've actually traveled a pretty far distance. We've changed a lot of things. We've gained new insights, new skills, new ways of doing things, and a process that we can always repeat to keep progressing in the direction we want. So that's the being strategy that I use to help people get in touch with what's really right for them.
Well, I think it's a really it's great. The acronym is great because it does present an easy way to keep track of this kind of a systematic way of looking through this, and that's really what I think when anytime we kind of create a system, it kind of helps us create a habit in a way, and the habits that become more effective, I think, I think what everybody's looking for is those habits like that. So that's really great. So could you just one more time quickly outline it to make
Sure.
sure I got it? So it's B. B is that just
B
B,
is
right?
begin where you are.
Begin where you are, yeah, and then explore
E is
is
explore
E.
where you want to go. I is identify your options. N
I
is now
got it.
start, and G is get your best.
Yeah, that's really great. I love that. I mean, I really that's a great acronym, and I'm going to I'm going to borrow this from you and use it for myself because I definitely could use this in my own personal life. So thank you, John. That's I'm already just not just a podcast; it was sort of a therapy session for me. So thanks.
My
Thank you
pleasure.
thank you for that. I appreciate it. It's a
Yeah.
good acronym. Could we go back to what I said though? Is there
Yeah.
any impactful? Tell us of some of the impact that this thought process or this system has had on other people, or even yourself. You don't got to have other people; it could just be you. You're
Yeah.
probably the first. You're probably the first. Person that you tried it with, right? I would say. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely, it does. And again, I think that's part of where I came up with it was dealing with my own circumstances. And um, it's really that idea of how did I want to be in the world? How did I want to show up? And looking at each step of this to figure that out.
Mhm,
And that's where the authenticity piece came through to me because what are my answers to this, to each step of this? And then challenging myself, how do I show up in that way across different domains of my life? And
mhm.
part of the answer for me was no longer being in academia professionally because I wasn't going to be able to show up in the ways that were most authentic to me. And when I was thinking about how I felt I made the biggest difference, it was with my students, but not the formal instruction, but those informal conversations
Mm,
about how did it apply to their own life and
yeah.
working with graduate students uh, around what were their questions and how were they going to find their own answers. And that's what I found truly fulfilling and gratifying. Well, how do you find your own questions and how are you going to find your own answers to your own questions? Life coaching. And that's what steered me into something totally different.
Hmm.
The other example that really comes through to mind is it was the first client who I actually worked through the entire system. And once I like originally defined the strategy, and we did a 6-month engagement. And it's part of why I refer to myself as a transformational life coach and consultant and speaker.
Hmm.
I'm not looking to have clients 2 years, 3 years engagements. If someone wants the support, I'm always available, but I really want to help equip people to make the transformations they make and go forward in the world in the way that's right for them. And
Hmm.
again, we can always all check in with extra support at times,
Hmm.
but the individual in question had a nonprofit that they'd had for over a decade at that point.
Hmm.
And it really hadn't, it was sort of just, status quo at that point.
Hmm.
And I really believe in supporting people who support people, and it was doing amazing work. And I knew that it just wasn't doing much.
Hmm.
And I had a 6-month engagement with the founder, and it was so interesting because I'm not a finance guy. So we never did coaching around money.
Hmm.
I'm not marketing myself as a health and wellness coach. We didn't talk about fitness.
Hmm.
But we did get in touch with authentically what mattered to this person. How did they want to show up? What mattered to them about the nonprofit? And so over the course of the engagement, they rebranded, they launched under a new name, they restructured the board accordingly. And when I checked in with him 3 months after we terminated, or I shouldn't say terminated, concluded the engagement, uh,
Hmm.
they had 3 times as much money in the bank as when we started.
Hmm.
And when I checked in with him a year after, they had 10 times as much. Not
Wow.
because we'd spoken about money, but they were so much more aligned with what mattered to them, what they were trying to do, why they were doing it the way that we were doing it. Again, when I checked with him 3 months after we completed the engagement, again, we never spoke about fitness. He was down 15 pounds.
Hmm.
that to me was like, okay, this system makes sense and works. If we get in touch with what matters to us, why it matters to us, how we want to show up in the world, you can't help but transform the impact.
What's really interesting about that story is how many different elements, the personal health, personal wealth, company growth, and just different things seem like they fall in alignment. Is that a fair statement to say that when you get this one element of your, you're focusing on yourself to get yourself in that being format, that the impacts and the ripple effect affects other people and organizations and things like that? Tell us about that.
Absolutely. And it's one of those things, I think we all have had it where you just meet someone and just being around them changes how you view the world, right?
Hmm.
Uh, and so I usually find it's not necessarily like sometimes they have a great inspiring message. Fantastic. But more often, at least for me and in my experience, it's just how do they show up with people? And I learn more about how I want to be in the world from how they show up than to anything they say.
Mm.
And so to me, that's where we have the chance to make a more caring and connected world is if each person is showing up with more authenticity, just being who they really are versus who we all think we're supposed to be. And I think the best analogy is like when we all start dating once upon a time. It's
Hmm.
like we start by showing up as the person we think the other person wants us to be. And eventually, if we both pretend long enough, we get to then figure out, well, wait a minute, am I comfortable enough now to actually be more of myself? And do I actually
Hmm.
like that person? And does that person like me? Well, what if we all just showed up as ourselves to begin with and find who are the right people for us? And
That's
so I think, on episode 66 of this podcast, where you were talking about pure motive service, I think it's a really good analogy because what is that motive? What's really authentic to you? And if you show up with what, do you really care is very different from I'm trying to pretend I care.
mm,
If you
that's it.
don't really care, that's not the position for you.
I agree with you. It's like finding what's in your heart, right? That's the be that part where you're trying to explore all that inside your heart. Because a lot of people don't, they have a hard time with that. I think a lot of times people have been taught to shut their feelings down, or they've cut it off emotionally and kind of numb themselves to where they don't aren't willing to explore that because some of it's painful. It can be a
Mhm.
painful exploration. Have you how does somebody get through it when they are resistant to making that journey inside in a way? Does that make sense there?
Yeah, it absolutely does. And I think part of what happens there is that we all want to have fulfilling lives. We all want to have enjoyable lives. Uh, we all want to have meaningful lives in different measures, right?
Hmm.
And part of how emotions work is it's not like you can only limit some of them. We're just turning down the amplitude on everything. And so, to the extent that we block difficult or challenging emotions, feelings, we're actually damping down our ability to experience joy and fulfillment and enjoyment as well.
That's
And
true.
I think there's a real trap in society of toxic positivity. Look for the best in everything. Everything happens for a reason. No,
Yeah.
everything happens. What meaning do I choose to take from it? What lessons am I willing to learn from it? That's different from saying there's an inherent meaning to it. Bad things happen. There's real tragedy. There's real suffering in the world. But rather than stopping there, where do I want to go? For anyone who isn't familiar, Brene Brown's Atlas of the Heart is a fantastic resource for
Mm,
really understanding different emotions and different nuances of emotion.
okay. That's definitely great advice. Yeah, I think that's it. That's it's like it's really great. Just from the very beginning of this interview, the just the paradigm of thinking about the word human being It's, I'm still kind of like I was drifting off a little bit there after we were talking in the beginning because I'm like, yeah, why don't we focus on that word more? Why are we? It's like it's a word that's in front of us and all in plain sight, yet it's like something that's kind of hidden in a way too. Does that make sense there? How does somebody stay? And is that where you're? Is that kind of like what you do? Kind of help people stay on that mindful path to achieve the things where they can begin, explore, identify, and get started now, and then get what they need to get from this. Is that the kind of do you lead people on that journey, John, or what's your role in this thing? You just teach it, or do you help lead people on this journey? Tell us about what your actions are to help people with this.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I'd said, part of the name of the business Steps Along the Way is because, how do we each get to be who we are in the world? Well, it's what steps have led us here, but we can be intentional and mindful and deliberate about what are our next steps. And
Hmm.
so that's what I really see my role as, is to be a catalyst and a support mechanism to help people figure out what steps they want to take and be that support and that foundation for them until they're comfortable doing it on their own. And so whether it's in individual coaching, team coaching, whether it's consulting, whether it's in any of my speaking engagements, it really is different pieces of this puzzle.
Hmm.
And if the being is sort of the strategic piece, I think there's also the importance and the need for tactical pieces because life comes at us. It can be really overwhelming. And I think there's amazing work out there on, what's your why and meaning. And, Simon Sinek is best known for the why
Hmm.
stuff.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, Viktor Frankl and Man's Search for Meaning and logotherapy. Great work. But I know for myself, when I'm feeling overwhelmed, I'm not like, what's my why? I'm like, right? I mean, like I'm
Mm-hmm.
in it. And so what I have found tactically to be the most useful question is to press that pause button essentially and ask myself, how do I want to show up right here? Not what do I want to do? How do I want to show up? And that I think is about the being versus the doing.
Mm-hmm.
The what do I want to do? What do I want to say? I've had so many experiences in my life where whether it's 2 minutes later, 2 hours, 2 weeks, I'm like, crap. I wish I had said something different. I wish I had done something different.
Mm-hmm.
But if instead of focusing on what, it's how do I want to show up and use that as my compass,
Yeah.
it's never steered me wrong yet.
I could see that. I could see, it's funny because, I think it is kind of counterculture to especially the American culture of, we just do things with just do it is like one of the most popular, phrases that have been invented in marketing, at Nike. And nobody says just be it or being it, And so it's definitely runs a little bit. I could see how it's definitely must be tough to get this message out there because a lot of people are so busy doing it, they don't have a chance to stop and ask, how do you want to show up and how do you want to be present in those situations? But you know what? The people who are, I've seen the people who are extremely successful, they do have a presence, and we do the being is something that we are all inspired by, and we're the way that the way that they are, the way they show up, and the way they're present kind of inspires us to say, yeah, I got to be more like that. I would, I have a thing I teach called the 30 things you want to do, be, and have. I do have the do first, but maybe I should put the be first, the be, do, and have. I don't know. Maybe I should change that. But I think that one doesn't go very well without the other, right? I think you have to like the now is the kind of like the do step. Let's take action on it, type of a thing. But wow, John, I could talk to you for hours. You know that, right? I hope it. I've already taken up a lot. I've taken up a lot of your time already, John. So you said before that you don't want to go for 2 years with somebody. Does that mean that you want longer, or you want short? You think it should be done shorter time? What do you mean by that a little bit? Tell us a bit about that. How long does it take somebody? What kind of interaction or engagement do you like to see with people to make an impact on them like this?
Yeah. So again, it depends on in what domain. If I'm talking one-on-one coaching, I aim for about 6 months because if you're going to go deep, it's not an overnight process. If it's going to be a real transformation and not just, a band-aid on the surface,
Hmm.
it does take some time. but at the same time, it's not a, you need to keep going back. You need to keep, uh, adding a little bit and a little bit because it's the core we're trying to transform. It's the
Hmm.
being. And once you've done that, again, happy to be of support going forward, check in with people going forward. But one-on-one coaching, it's about 6 months. Group or team coaching, it depends what they're interested in. If it's, just like, strengths identification, if it's, just mind sets and frameworks for dealing with what is, those are shorter. If it's a speaking engagement, then, it might be 45 minutes. It might be, a
Yeah.
set of workshops over a weekend. And there isn't an answer, but there is what's the next step.
Everybody's got something they need to figure out, that presence they're trying to bring, and that the way they want to be, and that being. And I definitely think there's so many different avenues, definitely so many ways you could help. And so, John, if we is there any material or things that people can pick up from you, or is it just make a call, or what's the best way that people could start to get help with this? Because I think there's a lot of executives, or even good salespeople or good service people, who are premium people, and they just there's still an uneasiness or a lack of peace of mind or whatever in the way they're doing, because they're just like that. I don't think they think about this enough. I think this is an element that does create a differentiation in different people, I think, in a huge way. John, so what's the best way that people can do? I think, thank you for the research with the other book you recommended. That's really great. I think, is there anything else that you can recommend people can get some resources to begin to move this way? And also, if you want to give your contact information, feel free to do that as well.
Sure. So my website is stepsalongtheway.global. I happen to be a nomad at the time, but also my cultural anthropology background. I wanted to be really clear that, I don't just think in one way and I'm not just for people from one background. So stepsalongtheway.global. Uh, and as far as some support, everyone's next step is their own and it's what's right for them. And so I welcome anyone who's listening and interested to a Your Next Steps chat with me. And so if you
Hmm.
just go to Steps to Chat, so just spell it out as one word, STEPSTOCHAT, stepstochat.com. Uh, Totally complimentary, no strings attached, 30-minute conversation with me on identifying your next steps.
Well, you definitely don't look like the kind of guy who's going to give me a hard sales pitch, so I think everybody could trust that. So steps2chat.com, is it, you
Yep.
said? Steps2chat.com, and for Dr. Jonathan Marion, who can help you take a look at I always say the biggest competitor we have is right in the mirror. And they get one of those things I really believe in. And John, let me just say what a pleasure and unexpected pleasure it was to meet you. Sometimes the universe does provide accidents that are very fortuitous to us, and definitely I feel like this was one where we kind of stumbled across each other, and you were probably like, "Who is this dude?" Right? But I definitely, you probably did some research. Like, do I want to be on this thing? I'm glad you did come on, because I think definitely a lot of people are going to get helped by it, and I feel like I myself are going to get helped by it. So thank you so much for your help and explaining some of this stuff. And you never know, I might see my contact come across your steps to chat, right?
Yep.
.com.
Stepstochat.com.
Yeah, that's a good URL. Thank you so much, John. Thanks so much for being here. I appreciate you.
Absolutely my pleasure, Joe. Thank you so much for having me on.
All right, thank you, everybody. Have a good. We'll see everybody on the next episode of the Service MVP podcast.